Hi, I'm Jim Rondo from the Canadian Company of Pilgrims Victoria Chapter. I'm here talking today with the Reverend Sandy Brown, who's going to talk about the Via Francigena. Hopefully you enjoy the video. Greetings. My name is Jim Rondo from the Canadian Company of Pilgrims Victoria Chapter, and here we're talking to the Reverend Sandy Brown, and we're talking about the Via Francigena interview. And Sandy right now is in Luga, and we're very welcome to say hi and welcome again to our video series.
Thanks so much for having me, Jim. It's nice to be back with you. And we love Lucca here. We have a home in Italy as well as in Seattle. So we're about 9 hours different than you are, but it's great to see. It looks like you have daylight out there.
Yeah, we have daylight, and it's similar temperatures actually from what you're experiencing.
Yeah, sunny day in Victoria. You should be out enjoying it.
But it's more enjoyable chatting with you. Can you explain a little bit about your experience? Because you're a long-time walker, you're an experienced Camino goer. Give us a little experience about what you have done in the past.
Sure. It was about 1992, and I read the book, The Pilgrimage by Paulo Coelho. And I said, I've got to walk the Camino de Santiago sometime in my life. And finally, it was in 2008 that I had the opportunity to do that. And I enjoyed it so much that I sent my son the next year. And then I walked on a 2-week vacation the year after that for the whole year. Then I walked it again in 2011. I did the Del Norte in 2012. And I transitioned to pilgrimage tracks in Italy. I walked the Way of St. Francis a total of 6 times over the next 3 years. I did the Camino a couple more times, and then I started walking what I consider really one of the great Caminos of the world, and that's the Via Francigena. And congratulations for doing a pretty good job of pronouncing it there, Jim.
Well, I'm not Italian. You have a lead on that, but I appreciate that. So can you tell us a little bit about what the route is and where it goes?
The Via Francigena is a route that travels from Canterbury, England, to Rome, Italy, and then actually there's another 1,000 kilometers that has been added to the end. About the year 990, the Archbishop of Canterbury was to go to Rome to receive his pallium, which is the woolen cloak that's given to archbishops. And so he walked with a retinue to Rome, and then he had a secretary record his journey on the way back with all the places that they stayed. And then that was put in his library. The library was saved at Canterbury Cathedral. Then it made its way to the British Museum. And about 100 years ago, somebody said, "What is this document?" And they figured out that it was Archbishop Sigeric of Canterbury's itinerary. And as they studied it, they realized what they were seeing was a medieval pilgrimage route from the UK to Rome. That route was walked by thousands of people, and they didn't just end in Rome, as Archbishop Sigeric did, but they also continued on to Bari or to Brindisi and took boats then to the Holy Land. So you can see here on the map what it looks like, starting in Canterbury for a couple of days. And then you take a ferry over to Calais, and began walking. And the total itinerary on the official route is 2,200 kilometers. And that's about 90 to 100 days of walking to make it from Canterbury to Rome. And it's a truly fabulous trip.
Wow, that's amazing. I know we've done the 800 kilometers of the Francais route. That's well over double. So how long you said it takes like 100 days? I know you've done it. Can you talk about how long it's taken you in the route a little bit?
Well, I've done it in bits and pieces over time. I walked starting in Piacenza, which you can see on the map here. It's about halfway through the Italian portion, and walked to Rome. Then I started in Lausanne, walked to Piacenza. The next year, I started in Lausanne and walked to Rome. This year, I started at Calais. I didn't start in Canterbury because of the difficulties of getting into England because of COVID, but I've walked that route before. This year I started in Calais and walked to Lausanne, and it took me about 50 days, 50 days, to make that distance. I took a couple of vacations in the meantime, and so when you add it all up, it was about 50 days.
Wow. I'm glad you didn't walk in the channel. You'd be run down by the train. So, um, let's talk about how the different parts of the trip. So let's talk about the Canterbury and into France section. What's it like? Can you talk about what the topography is like, the walk is like, and then we'll talk about the accommodations later.
Sure. Look here at the map and you see the Canterbury to Dover portion. It's about 30, 35 kilometers, about 20 miles. And so it's very possible to start early in Canterbury and walk all the way to Dover. But you want to spend some time in Canterbury because it's so amazingly beautiful. They're doing remodeling, or I should say renovations on the outside of the cathedral. So you have to be very cagey about exactly where you're taking your pictures and to walk through the countryside. This is a portal of an Anglo-Saxon church at Patrick's Bourne. So we tend to think that the ancient things are going to be Roman or in Italy. In the UK, here's 1,000 or more year old door. You can see the very intricate carvings along it that indicate for scholars that this door is 1,000 years old. Then the walk from Canterbury to Dover is on a national trail called the North Downs Way. And you're walking through fields, agricultural fields, and they're gradually heading downhill. And if you haven't walked this, one thing that you notice is the earth is very thin. The soil is thin. And you can see places where it's blown away or washed away. And underneath the soil, it's white chalk. And that all makes sense when you get to the white cliffs of Dover. And so you get onto a boat, and there are ferries that run several times a day. Now you can walk onto the ferry, and you're done. You're done with England in either one day or in 2 days to cover that 30 or so kilometers.
Excellent. And so that's the first part. And now you get into France after the ferry. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit what you'd encounter in France.
You get to the first French city, and it's Calais. And Calais is very much like what you would imagine Belgium or Flanders to be. So you see this exuberant city hall of Calais, and you realize you already realize you're in a grand countryside. So then the first day that you walk is along the coastline, and it's a beautiful, beautiful coastline on that first day. Then you turn south. France flattens out, and your experience over the next 3 weeks or so is going to be of a very flat countryside. So if you're from Saskatchewan, or if you're from Kansas, or anywhere in the great flat middle of North America, you're very familiar with this kind of walking. And it's also agricultural.
Okay, so you're walking across the plains, you're encountering small villages and towns, and what's the accommodation and meals like?
What's a little bit different about France is that you're more often to stay in a gîte. And there are a couple of different kinds of gîte. A gîte may be like a tiny municipal albergue on the Camino Frances, where there are one or two or three rooms of cots and a shared kitchen. And that's a gîte d'étape, a gîte of the stage. But there's another kind of gîte that's actually one of the charms of the Francigena in France, and that's more of a normal gîte. What it is a person has opened up a part of their house or a room in their house, and then invite pilgrims to come and stay. And so you come and stay, and you've booked with them that you want, say, a demi-pension. So they cook you dinner, and then in the morning they cook you breakfast, almost as though you're part of the family. So oftentimes I would have family dinner with a family as I arrive in a town, and then I'd have breakfast and be out the door, all at somebody's kitchen table.
And it would cost approximately how much for that type of, we'll call it bed and breakfast for people, and
Yeah,
dinner?
yeah. That would typically be 40 or 50 euros to include your overnight and your dinner and breakfast.
Okay.
So that's not a bad amount.
Especially for good food.
Yeah, the French do know how to cook.
Yeah.
I have to tell you, Jim, I'm still trying to duplicate some of the recipes that people cooked for me, as I was getting my demi-pension.
You'll never win on that one.
Yeah, when I got home, I was looking for pots so I could put chicken over rice with vegetables, stick it in the oven for an hour and 15 minutes, and come out with a perfect dinner that hardly took any work at all.
It's not going to happen. So let's talk about the Swiss portion, and talk about a little bit about the Alps and crossing the Alps, and because I've gone through the Alps and I can't imagine walking them.
One of the things that's quite an experience in France is that much of the territory that you walk through was territory that was fought over in World War One. So you're going both through World War One battlefields, and you're walking along cemeteries that were cemeteries of French or cemeteries of German or Australians, Canadians. There's Canadian, at least one Canadian cemetery. And that makes a different experience for the walker, because you're realizing that this was hard fought ground, and young people, almost exclusively men, lost their lives in that ground. So you can't walk it without having really kind of deep feelings of grief and sadness over what you're experiencing. So, and then of course, France has lots of other charms. For instance, there's a beautiful cathedral at Laon. There's a beautiful cathedral at Reims, Rennes, as they say, Some people say it's a more beautiful cathedral than Notre Dame de Paris. It's a harmonious and beautiful design. Then there's these great medieval cities like Langres, which is fully encapsulated within its medieval walls. And also Besançon, which is one of the great towns of northeastern France. Then you're ready to get into Switzerland.
So can you please tell me a little bit about the Alps in Switzerland?
Well, first of all, you have to cross a mountain range to get into Switzerland. So, the Jura Mountains, Jura, are between France and Switzerland. It's the same word for Jurassic because they found dinosaur bones there. So you cross the Jura Mountains, and that's a nice warm up for getting to cross the Alps. You walk along the shores of Lac Léman, or Lake Geneva, as we call it in English. And then you begin the gradual, at first, walk first up the Rhone Valley, then you turn right up into the Drance Valley, and then you go into the Drance d'Entremont Valley, which is how you get up to the Great St. Bernard Pass. You have to time your ascent so that you're not having to tunnel through snow. And the pass is closed for quite a bit of the year. The path itself is reliably open in August and September. You can walk up the road, usually by mid-June, but I usually have waited until early August to make the crossing at the Great St. Bernard. And to me, it's like walking across the Cascades above the tree line. The elevation is about 2,400 meters, about 8,200 feet. So it's high. And that's why there's snow up until high summer. At the top of the Great St. Bernard Pass is one of the real treats of the entire Via Francigena. And that's the 1,000-year-old hospice that was set up by St. Bernard himself, where pilgrims and hikers overnight. And you can get your dinner, and then you get your breakfast, and that's at the very top of the pass. That's where they bred St. Bernard dogs. They didn't have the little flasks of brandy. That's only in the cartoons and in the movies. But that's where the dogs were bred in order to help rescue stranded hikers. And there you can still see a St. Bernard museum up at the top of the Great St. Bernard Pass.
Did you have to book early to get into that facility?
Yeah, you do need to book early because a lot of people hike in. It's not just for pilgrims. It's for people that are hiking, the great alpine hikes. Just over the ridge is Mont Blanc.
Yeah.
So people that are doing Mont Blanc walks are sometimes popping over. And it's really very exciting as a pilgrim, who's used to walking city to city. Now we're among mountain climbers, and they got their big ropes and their crampons and all of their gear. And, I'm just a simple pilgrim, and these all are serious technical climbers.
Yeah, I know that I've walked that when I was younger. I grew up in near that area, so it's just spectacularly beautiful. So yeah, I get that. So talk to us now. You've gone through Switzerland. You've gone through the expensive cappuccino. Now tell us about what the Italian section's like.
The Italian section is why I'm living in Lucca right now, because I love it so much. Every Italian region is a little bit different. So when you come over the Great St. Bernard Pass, you're in the Aosta Valley, Aosta Valley, where they speak French as well as Italian. And that is alpine scenery with castles on, every ridge as you walk down, along the river. So that's scenically beautiful also, almost like Switzerland. Although you come down in elevation very fast in the first day, and you gradually lose elevation for the next 7 days. Then you find yourself in Piemonte or Piedmont, which means foot of the mountain. And there is more rolling hills with old brick churches and very charming scenery. And here there may be lakes and vineyards. Piemonte is a big wine growing area also. Then you get into Lombardia and Emilia Romagna, which is flatland, just as flat as France or, the Great Plains. And so you walk for about 2 weeks on the flats of the Po River. You go to the towns of Pavia, Piacenza. Then you have another mountain range to climb. You've got to get over the Apennines. That puts you into Liguria, another of the Italian regions. That's where pesto and focaccia were invented. So you come along the shore of the Mediterranean, you go over a small mountain range into Lucca, and you're in Tuscany. And I enjoyed this so much when I first walked it in 2016. I sat and looked at a mosaic on San Frediamo in Lucca, and I said, I'm going to live here someday. And so sure enough, I am. And my wife had to deal with the fact that I made that commitment to myself too, but she's here learning Italian as well, and I think having a good time. You get through Tuscany and you're into the rolling volcanic terrain of Lazio, and you arrive at Rome. It's quite spectacular, varied terrain here in Italy.
Tell us a little bit of the accommodation and food in Italy through Tuscany.
Well, the Italians would say that the French have nothing on them in food. And French are great with bread. I mean, the baguette is a work of art. Italy is great with pasta. And every region has its specialty. When you're in Emilia Romagna, you can get bubbly red wine. It tastes like red wine, but it has bubbles in it. As you cross over the Apennines, you're in the area of the famous Portobello mushrooms. Italy is known for having wild game on the table, and so boars are hunted in the fall, and the boar meat is the basis for sauces like ragu. And then, of course, the meat. Italy is famous for its meat, like prosciutto. And I don't eat meat myself, but I know it academically, and my wife enjoys it very much. And then Tuscany, of course, you have focaccia from the Liguria, you have the ragu, and every town in Italy has its own pasta. In Lucca, it's tortelli duchesse. And my wife had it at dinner last night. It's meat inside of a ravioli with a very rich tomatoey sauce. And she tells me it was really great.
Excellent. So you've gone through England, France, Switzerland, and Italy, northern Italy. You get to Rome. Tell us what it's like to arrive in Rome and St. Peter's Square. Because I know that's a very emotional thing on a shorter pilgrimage. What's it like after 2,000 Ks?
It's amazing. So to arrive in Rome is different because there are many pilgrims also that have taken planes and buses and trains and driven to Rome. I think Rome has something like 14 million pilgrims a year. Santiago de Compostela has a couple million. So everybody is there. And they look good and all dressed up, perfumed, and showered when the pilgrim walks in. and at least for me, I am usually a little bit sweaty, a little bedraggled. I'm tired and footsore. I'm wearing a hiking t-shirt. And then I walk into the grandeur of St. Peter's Square. And that itself is an emotional experience. So you're with so many people to begin with, and they're all there for the same, well, for religious reasons and for touristical reasons. You have to put your backpack someplace, like in your hostel or in your hotel room. Then you go through security and you make it into the basilica, which is one of the great buildings. I'm not saying churches, one of the great buildings of the world. 500 years old, the dome by Michelangelo, surrounded with Bernini sculptures. The Pietà is there. The Grand Baldacchino by I'm going to forget who, by Bernini also. And then you take your credential. You can walk into the sacristy where they dress, for the mass. You walk past the list of all of the popes for the last 2,000 years. A man in a nice suit is standing behind a tall desk. You show him your credential, and he gives you your certificate. And it's quite the experience. It's not as personal as what you would get in Santiago de Compostela, but it's very grand. And then, of course, Rome is one of the great tourist destinations of the world. So it's a grand experience that's full of depth and color and richness and chaos. So it's great. It's a great experience.
Well, I can only imagine, but maybe we'll do that route shortly. Tell us a little bit about any advice you have for people who are talking about this route and preparing for the route.
Sure. The first thing is, if you're an American or Canadian or British or Australian, you have to pay attention to your visa, because from outside of Europe, unless you're an EU citizen, you're given 90 days to stay in Europe. So I mentioned that the walk is 90 to 100 days. So you have to plan very carefully so you can fit the entire walk into the 90 days that non-Europeans are allowed in. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, if you're walking in France, you should bone up on your French. Bring a phrase book or acclimate yourself to Google Translate so that you have a few phrases, because in the countryside, they expect that you're going to be able to communicate. That's not quite the same in Switzerland. In Switzerland, there's a lot of English. There are commonly polyglots in Switzerland, as you probably know, because they're required to learn either French, German, or Italian, and then one or two other languages besides that. In Italy, in the tourist places, you can get by with less Italian than the French that you need in France. So that's a consideration. In France, you want to plan ahead and make sure you have the resources to be able to plan for your housing. There are stretches of 30 to 35 kilometers where there's not a separate place to stay. So you're going to have to walk it or bus or, make your way through. And you don't want to end up after walking 35 kilometers and not have a reservation.
Yeah.
So you need to plan a few days ahead. It's very simple. The tip that I would give is when you arrive at your destination for the night, ask advice of your host about what's the best place to stay next. And they'll know because they've helped countless pilgrims before you. And they'll even make the telephone call for you so that you know that you have a bed. That's the trickiest part. Also, last tip, when you're walking in France, make sure you have extra food in your pack, because some of these small French towns don't have a store or a bakery or even a cafe. In Italy, there's a cafe on every corner and in every small town. In France, it's not the way that it is. So bring extra food so you don't go hungry.
Well, thank you. And now the final question is, you've written guidebooks. Can you talk about your guidebooks and what people can expect as far as coming out in the future?
Sure. I am writing now my fifth guidebook, and I'll write later this year my sixth guidebook. My first guidebook is to the Way of St. Francis in Italy, Florence to Assisi, and Rome. And then my second guidebook was the Camino Frances of the Camino de Santiago. I'm very pleased. We've had great response on that book, and we're going into the second printing. So I've been working on accommodation updates and updates about the route, and that will come out in June of this year with the new printing. After that, in fact, as part of the deal for me writing that guidebook, I told Cicerone Press I wanted to write the new Via Francigena guides. So they're in a series of 3, and I started backwards. I did number 3 first, which is Lucca to Rome. That's available for sale. It came out in January of last year. And then the second volume is Lausanne over the Great St. Bernard Pass to Lucca. That came out last March. And then the third volume is what I'll soon be working on. That's Canterbury to Lausanne. That's where I walked it last year. I'll probably go back and ride it on a bicycle this time, this year, before I send in my final manuscript. In the meantime, I'm writing a 6th book, and that is on the California Missions Trail. There are 21 Spanish missions in California from the Bay Area to San Diego. It's an 800-mile walking or biking itinerary. And my final book will be volume 1 of the Francigena that will come out in February of 2023, a year from now.
If people are interested in getting your book, what's the easiest way of getting your book? And what would you recommend?
Sure. The easiest way is just to go on Amazon. I don't encourage it because Amazon doesn't reward authors or publishers very much. You can also go to the publisher, which is Cicerone Press, and that's Cicerone, CICERONE.co.uk. And Cicerone Press will send a guidebook anywhere in the world for a delivery cost of £5. So that's a great way to get it. Even with a discount through the publisher, Cicerone Press and I do better and have our costs covered if you can order that way.
Okay. Well, uh, Mr. Brown, Reverend Brown, I'd like to thank you again for your second interview. You're fabulous and engaging. We really, really appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you in person and sharing a glass of red wine.
Fabulous. Let's make it the bubbly kind.
Sure, we'll do it in the Tuscan countryside. How's that?
Okay, I'm waiting for you. Let's make it happen.
All the best to you and your wife, and have a great time walking and writing.
Thank you, Tim.
Bye-bye.
God bless. Bye-bye.